A predator waited in the shadows that August afternoon in 2019, right as beloved educator Lindsay stepped outside. She was just taking a quick routine stroll through the local woodlands near her Lancashire property, expecting only fresh air. Night fell, phone calls rang out into the void, and a locked house sparked absolute panic as desperate neighbors began hunting for the missing 47-year-old woman. The gruesome truth emerged days afterward along a silent graveyard trail, where searchers found her mutilated remains stuffed inside twin plastic sacks packaged with terrifying precision. What turns a peaceful hike in broad daylight into a scene of premeditated slaughter, and who exactly was the mysterious youth filmed hauling a trash can toward that burial site? Welcome to the terrifying case of Lindsay Burbeck, a woman who simply went to navigate a deeply familiar trail she had safely trekked a million times as before. Yet the 12th of August 2019 held a much darker fate, even though her morning started off completely normal. The dedicated educator was on summer break, fully intending to soak up some wonderful moments with her beloved relatives. She hit the Blackburn shops alongside her teenage girl Sarah before heading back to prepare a cozy dinner where she would finally meet her daughter's current partner. The mother swung by her place just long enough to swap clothes for a nature hike, stepping out the door at 4 p.m. to disappear forever. The ensuing nightmare completely shattered the peaceful illusion of this small Lancashire community. Unraveling the bizarre circumstances of her vanishing acts forces us to question what sparked such devastation on a boring Monday and whose hands were actually stained with blood. Framed by gorgeous local green spaces and heritage sites, this brutal narrative exposes the sinister underbelly hiding behind an idyllic facade. She split from her spouse Tim during July 2018, cohabitating in Hapton until March 2019 when the divorce finalized and she relocated to a Huncote property. Family was everything to her, particularly her 20-year-old son Devin and 17-year-old daughter Sarah, while her professional life blossomed as a highly creative teaching assistant for senior elementary classes. Her artistic talents constantly wowed the school during theatrical productions, yet that beautiful legacy was abruptly cut short on the 12th of August right after lunch. She trekked into the coppice, a thick forest bordering her neighborhood just outside Accrington limits, and basically vanished off the face of the earth. Evening rolled around, bringing Sarah and her beau Brandon to the house for their scheduled dinner date. Silence greeted their knocks, instantly triggering Sarah's alarm bells since her mom would never casually ditch a major family event. Frantic dials went straight to voicemail, prompting a highly anxious message demanding to know her exact location. The teens loitered on the porch for 60 minutes, dialing her 6 different times, before shooting off a frantic row of punctuation marks that yielded absolutely zero replies. Panicking over the utter lack of clues, the teen eventually contacted her dad, Tim explaining that the house was empty and all communication was totally dead. Hearing the sheer terror in his daughter's voice, Tim immediately drove over to collect the young couple and shelter them at his own place. Midnight approached with no updates, forcing the deeply distressed father and daughter back to the property armed with backup entry keys. Unlocking the front door revealed an eerily quiet interior with every single room looking completely untouched and perfectly mundane. Not a single item was out of place, nor was there any scribbled message explaining her sudden, bizarre absence. Absolute dread set in, prompting Tim to dial emergency dispatchers at 11 minutes past midnight on August 13th, stating his former spouse was missing and the situation felt incredibly wrong. The authorities logged her status as actively lost, a terrifying update that absolutely devastated the famously close local population. Sleepy streets instantly transformed into a massive command center as hundreds of ordinary residents volunteered to track her down. Grandparents, cyclists, and parents with prams flooded the sidewalks in a unified mission to rescue a local woman, pushing aside the fact that they were complete strangers. Pure compassion fueled their relentless round-the-clock scouring of the rugged landscape. 48 hours saw massive search parties combing the tree lines, desperately praying to stumble upon the tiniest breadcrumb of evidence. Yet the total lack of physical traces forced everyone to confront a grim truth, realizing this rescue mission was turning into a total nightmare. Survival probabilities plummeted rapidly, leading the lead detectives to upgrade her file to a severe high-priority emergency. Relatives loudly reminded the press that running away was completely foreign to her nature, making the entire scenario feel impossibly wrong. Mounting panic only poured fuel on the fire, inspiring the locals to push their physical limits during the hunt. Mountains of printed handouts blanketed the town squares, while a digital coordination page exploded to over 10,000 active users almost overnight. Shortly after the official briefing dropped, her portrait papered every conceivable surface, turning shop fronts and streetlights into haunting reminders of the missing teacher. Law enforcement simultaneously launched a massive tactical operation deploying canine trackers, regional fire brigades, and specialized alpine teams to sweep the dense terrain. Choppers, and remote drones took the hunt into the sky, scanning vast stretches of rural pastures and popular hiking paths from high above. Finally, authorities broadcasted critical security tape documenting her final verifiable steps, clocked precisely at 10 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. Cameras caught her strolling down the pavement toward the woods, sporting a violet coat, black leggings, and dark trainers with bright soles. Time became the ultimate enemy, and by the 19th of August, a full 7 days deep into the mystery, the prospect of a happy ending felt impossible. Even with absolutely zero leads regarding her physical location, the investigative team publicly maintained a thin veil of positivity. The distinct lack of a crime scene kept a tiny ember of faith burning that she was still breathing somewhere out there. Time was rapidly bleeding away. Following an urgent online plea that evening, massive crowds of neighborhood locals flooded the streets to launch the initial community-wide hunt across the region. This remarkable display of solidarity stemmed from a frantic thirst for the truth. Suddenly, the atmosphere completely changed. While strolling past the Accrington burial grounds, a nearby homeowner watched his pet suddenly sprint into the thick trees. Shouting for the hound proved absolutely useless. The stubborn canine stayed completely glued to a specific patch of undergrowth, aggressively digging and sniffing at the soil, with its snout jammed downward. Moving closer, the walker stepped on something disturbingly mushy. Panic hit hard, forcing a quick retreat. A vile stench deeply saturated the surrounding breeze. Swarms of aggressive insects hovered overhead. Sticking out from the soil was a synthetic sack right alongside what resembled a severed person's heel. The hunt concluded tragically on August 24th, precisely 12 suns since Lindsay Beck initially vanished into thin air. Finding her remains revealed a truly sickening nightmare. Stripped bare, the victim lay, shoved inside a superficial graveyard pit, tightly bound inside twin transparent synthetic sacks. The killer hastily tossed soil and weeds over the victim, executing an incredibly sloppy and macabre cover-up effort. That dreadful unearthing instantly escalated the routine missing person file into a high-stakes homicide probe. Lead forensic examiner Dr. Naomi Carter handled the post-mortem ruling a snapped cervical spine as Lindsay's actual cause of passing. The sheer brutality was unimaginable. A completely obliterated windpipe strongly indicated a savagely powerful strike delivered by either a heel or kneecap. Horrifyingly skeletal scratch patterns suggested someone actually tried severing the victim's lower right limb with a serrated blade long after she had already perished. A massive laceration sliced straight down to her marrow. The sheer scale of trauma inflicted upon Lindsay was catastrophic, marking a spectacularly savage finale for such an adored being. Dr. Carter further emphasized how severe tissue decay severely hindered their ability to completely map out every single traumatic wound on the corpse. Because of the heavy putrefaction, the medical expert remained entirely unable to either verify or definitively dismiss the possibility a species of an indisposable bed assault. The agree before her demise. Adding to the creeping dread, law enforcement and civilian helpers had thoroughly scoured that exact graveyard sector for multiple days beforehand without spotting a single clue. Throughout those previous sweeps, several neighborhood folks and a K-9 unit supervisor actually noticed an Azure garbage cart dumped inside the adjacent shrubbery. Nobody panicked about the container initially. However, during the evening of August 20th, mere days before unearthing the victim, civilian helpers stumbled right back onto that identical rubbish bin. Spotting a mysterious crimson-like smudge outside the plastic, the group frantically flagged down authorities. Responding deputies checked the receptacle but quickly dismissed the brownish streak as mere mud. Seeing how pristine the cart looked and lacking any solid connection to the missing woman, cops simply left the object completely undisturbed. Completely hidden from public awareness back then, this totally mundane waste vessel actually concealed an unbelievably sinister piece of the deadly puzzle. Multiple crucial leads popped up across the burial grounds early in the probe, though investigators originally ignored or casually brushed them aside. August 18th saw neighborhood local Christine Alderson strolling with her pup and child, eventually spotting a heavily stained crimson rag discarded over the lawn. Even though the scarlet liquid looked incredibly wet and vibrant, she simply guessed it originated from a familiar vagrant who regularly camped nearby. That exact afternoon, fellow pet owner Judith Bibby found scarlet apparel, likely the victim's coat, snagged onto spike fencing by the Cargill Hill path. Furthermore, Judith remembered catching an adolescent-sounding tone, despite zero visible indications of violent brawls, screaming, or panic. Detectives finally circled back on August 25th, the dawn following the corpse's unearthing, unexpectedly securing massive breakthroughs right beside the superficial burial trench. They successfully retrieved a yellow-gripped cutting tool alongside emerald industrial mitts, both absolutely drenched in plasma. Subsequent lab analysis quickly validated the massive importance of these items. The victim's genetic profile coated the exterior of a single gauntlet, whereas the interior lining directly held the actual murderer's biological signature. Sitting close by an azure synthetic sack contained the dead woman's Skechers running shoes, both displaying distinct slashes right across the sides. Additional inspections proved the cadaver came bundled within commercial polyethylene layers, while loose vegetation and weeds were sandwiched directly between the flesh and wrapping. This foreign debris completely mismatched the graveyard's ecosystem, heavily implying the fatal attack and temporary storage occurred off-site prior to entombment. Such distinct evidence forced detectives to conclude the killer transported the corpse from another location entirely. Right then, authorities remembered the azure garbage receptacle that previously grabbed so much attention from neighborhood searchers. After intensely scanning surveillance recordings, constables stumbled across a shocking revelation that left the entire homicide unit speechless. Numerous captured frames clearly displayed an adolescent male dragging an azure waste cart down Burleigh Avenue. Over the subsequent days, a completely different security lens caught this exact guy revisiting the graveyard 4 separate times. This critical visual evidence quickly unmasked the prime target. That clip featuring the teenager pulling a rubbish container down the pavement, likely concealing Lindsay's remains, rapidly exploded online. Stations aired it nationally alongside an urgent public plea for name suggestions, a strategy that worked flawlessly. Absolutely horrified, educators and guardians immediately identified the juvenile prompting the cornered youth to willingly surrender at the local precinct hours later. Because the culprit was merely 16 during the murder courts legally shielded his name until the final punishment phase. That recorded teenage suspect was actually neighborhood local Rocky Marciano Price. Residing with his mother, father, and 5 brothers or sisters on Winnie Hill Avenue in Accrington, he occupied a property held by his relatives for nearly 30 years. Sadly, this adolescent battled a severe spectrum of psychological disorders. Doctors diagnosed Rocky with autism, severe hyperactivity, and chronic focus deficits during his early childhood. A remarkably diminished intelligence quotient further multiplied his massive hurdles regarding classroom education and interpersonal dialogue. Traveling to a specialized academy in Barnaldwick for several weekly sessions, faculty members painted him as an intensely silent pupil who virtually never spoke. Back in 2015, a mental expert assessed Price, formally declaring that the boy barely comprehended his personal feelings or internal psychological stability. He consistently failed to mentally connect real-world situations with corresponding human feelings. A 2016 dossier additionally painted Price as completely detached around unknown faces, perpetually requiring nonstop oversight and specialized attention. For 18 agonizing months, instructor Timothy Bradley fought a losing battle to spark even a glimmer of academic interest in the detached youth. Manual labor always trumped textbook learning for the boy who stayed completely silent, even when his absolute favorite subjects came up. Instructors frequently highlighted the boy's massive build and raw power, far exceeding typical adolescent strength. Pumping iron became a daily habit for him, alongside tending to the poultry flocks out on his family's rural property. While video games and films consumed his downtime, trapping him in a bizarre mental bubble where real-world consequences simply vanished. A completely senseless urge drove him to slaughter. She just tragically crossed paths with a predator who was actively hunting the streets for isolated targets. Any female victim would suffice for his grim mission as he prowled the area with sheer terrifying, murderous intent. Facing justice for an entirely unprovoked slaughter by an unknown assailant, the teenager entered the courtroom on August 12, 2020, precisely 1 year later. Following an 8-day second trial and 4 hours of intense debate, the jury convicted Rocky Marciano Price without hesitation while he watched remotely from Weatherby Penitentiary. Blank stares met the guilty declaration from the 17-year-old offender, a chilling indifference perfectly mirrored by his family members present in the gallery. While acknowledging his role in concealing the corpse, the defendant vehemently rejected any accusations regarding the actual bloody slaying. His wild excuse involved an unidentified man offering cold cash in exchange for his manual assistance in burying the deceased female. A pre-written document confessed to relocating the garbage bin and digging the grave, though it strongly maintained his absolute innocence regarding the fatality. Detectives shattered that flimsy alibi upon raiding his Accrington residence, unearthing synthetic sacks that perfectly matched the gruesome burial site's evidence. Forensic analysis linked his athletic wear to the exact outfit captured on security footage from August 12th at 1617. Mark Fenholz, representing the accused, conceded the sickening nature of the graveyard cover-up, but fought fiercely against the primary murder charge. Piles of damning proof meant nothing to the teen who clung to his innocence regarding the fatal strike while owning up to the corpse relocation. Following 48 hours of intense interrogation, legal counsel drafted a precise narrative charting the boy's exact path, leaving Copus, the suspected location of the horrific crime, right down to the graveyard that ultimately held the victim's concealed remains. Prosecutors destroyed that lie, proving the killer worked entirely solo. The senseless destruction of a 47-year-old mother of 2 lacked any clear reason given they were total strangers. A brutal life sentence was handed down demanding at least 16 years behind bars before a parole board could evaluate his threat level to society. The magistrate highlighted the shocking speed and savagery of the ambush, leaving zero doubt about the boy's sinister goal to execute a passing female. Mere seconds prior to the tragedy, Zoe Braithwaite dodged a terrifying encounter with a solitary, hooded youth strolling down an adjacent trail. Relying entirely on her gut feeling, she grew deeply suspicious of the boy's bizarre attire, which felt completely inappropriate for a seasonal forest hike. Sprinting away to safety ultimately spared her life. Evading that sinister trap meant another innocent soul would take the fall-sealing Lindsay's tragic destiny. Calculated malice drove his every move. Missing his initial prey only fueled his dark determination to hunt down a different solitary female. Post-murder behavior showcased a chilling level of strategic thinking and cold-blooded logic. Instructors verified his distinct preference for manual labor over studying a dark practical talent he utilized for corpse concealment. Records proved he visited the campus twice that August 12th evening. Camera footage captured his initial arrival at 6:55 p.m., showing the suspect hauling a heavy dark backpack. That bag likely concealed the cutting tool meant for terrifying mutilation purposes right before his subsequent return at 8:28 p.m. A local strolling with his pet Anthony DeWart accidentally spotted the team maneuvering a fully vacant refuse bin. This exact location housed the graves of his namesake grandfather and several relatives. Displaying zero emotional turmoil, the teenage predator independently executed a chilling cleanup operation, treating the victim like mere rubbish in a blue bin before dumping her into a shallow Accrington Cemetery trench inside 2 synthetic sacks. The monstrous cover-up involved stuffing the deceased woman into a rolling container and physically hauling her across the rough terrain toward the graveyard. Locating an isolated patch beside the train tracks, he devoted over 60 minutes to digging, carelessly abandoning his cutting tools, hand protection, and the bin. Slaughtering an unknown innocent under the glaring sun without a shred of reason sends absolute shockwaves through the hearts of all decent citizens. Such unpredictable violence serves as glaring proof that this individual remains in extreme danger to everyone walking the streets. Hunting a different female right before the fatal strike demolishes any theory about a momentary, uncontrollable lapse in sanity. 24 hours post-conviction, the presiding magistrate dissolved the media blackout, finally broadcasting the killer's face and true identity to the entire world. The true name of the vicious culprit remained heavily guarded throughout the entirety of both grueling courtroom battles. Jurors absorbed massive amounts of crucial background information, yet legal protections for minors kept the general public completely in the dark. Only the swift, unified guilty verdict gave the magistrate enough solid grounds to shatter that protective shield of anonymity forever. Psychological issues offer absolutely zero justification for this horror. He possessed full awareness of morality, but deliberately chose to execute an innocent life regardless. While these atrocities happen infrequently, they paralyze communities with terror, leaving a haunting mystery completely unsolved. What dark impulse pushed a boy to slaughter a total stranger? The killer fiercely guards that terrifying secret in silence. Fate tragically selected Lindsay instead of another target, leading loved ones to mourn her loss at Hampton's St. Margaret's Church on September 20th. Traffic ground to a halt on Manchester Road as more than 200 grieving souls stood outside, watching Lindsay's flower-covered casket make its final solemn journey into the church. Piles of beautiful bouquets marked the scene placed there by devastated relatives, close buddies, and complete strangers who were utterly heartbroken by her tragic story. Sarah remembered her mom as an incredibly bright and upbeat spirit, someone who was constantly looking forward and enthusiastically mapping out her upcoming years. She was actually plotting out a fun Glasgow getaway with her good pal Sharon, while also actively searching for her soulmate on the Match.com website. She genuinely pictured decades of joy ahead of her, practically overflowing with endless hope for whatever tomorrow might bring. Sadly, every single one of those bright hopes vanished on a perfect summer afternoon. While her loved ones and the investigating officers deeply appreciated the jury's unanimous guilty decision, they also fully understood that absolutely no legal judgment could ever bring Lindsay back, nor could it wash away the agonizing grief haunting her shattered inner circle. The moment the ruling dropped, the accused relatives protested right outside the courthouse, in custom shirts demanding the innocent boy be released. The back of their tops boldly declared that the true monster was still walking the streets. It is entirely plausible that Price harbored incredibly dark fantasies, craving the chance to permanently end someone's journey just to see what committing something so unimaginably gruesome actually felt like. This dark behavior likely stems from a deep-rooted neurological condition that severely disrupts normal social connections, basic physical coordination, and everyday habits. In essence, this spectrum condition describes an individual withdrawing deeply into their own isolated mental bubble, remaining completely cut off from the rest of society. The condition remains a highly complex developmental puzzle, likely driven by deeply ingrained genetic traits passed down through family bloodlines. Even though his true motivations remain a mystery here, the heavy sentence feels completely justified, regardless of whether Rocky Price was merely the one who ultimately concealed the tragic physical evidence. In a world that often feels rushed and distracted, this heartbreaking story reminds us of one powerful truth: every ordinary moment with the people we love is precious. A simple walk, a familiar path, an ordinary afternoon can change everything in an instant. That is why kindness, awareness, and connection matter more than we sometimes realize. Lindsay's story is not only a tragedy, it is also a lesson about love, community, and the responsibility we share to protect one another. Her family's concern, her daughter's instinct that something was wrong, and the overwhelming support of neighbors searching together all reveal the beauty of human compassion in the darkest moments. Even when fear spread, people chose unity over indifference. This is the message we must carry forward. Never take safety for granted, never ignore unusual warning signs, and never underestimate the value of checking in on those we care about. Communities become stronger when people stay alert, speak up, and stand together. Most of all, this story teaches us to honor life by living with greater empathy. Be present, be protective, be kind, because sometimes the smallest act of care can become the greatest act of love.